You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
Have you seen this new trend in journalism? I don't know if it's actually that new, but it's fairly new. Maybe it's where the person who's doing the interview asks a question, usually of an athlete or a coach, but maybe sometimes a celebrity, maybe a politician, where they frame their questions such that they tell the person they're interviewing how the things are and how they feel, but then they basically just ask them to rate how much they feel the way that the journalist just said they must feel. Maybe this is confusing. Let me give you an example. So let's say that your favorite sports team just went and got a tough road victory. It was a real scrappy, gritty victory, but they grinded out and they got one. And then you're talking to the coach, and the interviewer says, "Coach, great win tonight. How good do you feel right now about coming into a difficult environment like this and coming away with the win?" See, the way the question there is it's really like a 1 to 10 question. Obviously, you feel good. It was like a 7 or like an 8.5. How good is it? How worried are you right now, Coach, about the chances of making the playoffs? Another national championship. How proud are you right now of your teammates? And I'm just going to tell you straight up, I think those are terrible questions. And yet, when I read Nehemiah chapter 5 and I got to the end of it, and then I read it again, and then I read it again, I kept coming back to one of those kind of questions. And so I'm going to ask one of those kind of questions, even though I think they're really terrible questions. Here it is. Ready? In your brain, you can just rate this maybe on a scale of 1 to 10. I don't even know how you answer this. Here's the question. How much clout does Nehemiah have right now with the people who are rebuilding the walls? Because it's a lot. And if your answer is anything below a 5, I'm sorry. We're in a fight. Yeah, personally, it's a thing between you and me. We're in a fight. You're wrong, because Nehemiah has got at least 7+ clout with these people, but I think it's just got to be 10. What would more clout look like than what this guy's throwing around? He's a man who is rooted in history, rooted in the story of his people and the scriptures. He knows exactly who he is and exactly where he fits in the whole story. He knows exactly where you are in the, what act and what part of the story. He completely gets it. He's a man on a mission with absolute laser focus. And so all these things keep just crap getting chucked against the wall at Nehemiah. Like, we're going to kill you. Okay, well, we're going to work really hard and focus and fight hard for what's right. The end. He just handles it. Well, all the walls have been broken down for a real long time. Nobody seems to want to do anything about it. Well, it's time for you to rebuild then. Okay, it's time for us to rebuild. And he just handles it. And then the economic crisis we've been talking about in chapter 5. He realizes that the problem is the most powerful, elite, wealthy, influential, untouchable power broker families. And rather than cowering before them, he just calls them into a meeting. Every single one of you in here right now. Hey, is this true? Are you exploiting all these people? Yeah, I thought you were. Okay, we'll give back all their money, and you can't do that anymore. Give them back their land. No more enslaving people. Y'all ought to be ashamed. You're done with that. And instead of them fighting or arguing or justifying themselves, when have you ever seen a power broker elite type just take it? Instead of arguing, every single one of them says, we will give it back and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. That's crazy. No attempt to justify themselves. Think about in the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke, right? Think about how that all starts. It's like, oh, well, what's the most important command? And the answer is, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then the religious leader, who's all uppity and powerful and important, much like these wealthy people who Nehemiah is calling out, he couldn't just accept the answer. He had to go all philosophy guy and smarmy. And literally the text there says that he tried to justify himself by saying, well, yeah, okay, but who's my neighbor? And that is what prompts Jesus to give the parable of the Good Samaritan. The way that the Pharisee acts right there in his conversation with Jesus, that's how powerful people act. That's how normal people act. Heck, when we get accused of anything and we know we're on the ropes conversationally, we look back, we try to save face. These people are so defeated, I think, one, because they got caught red-handed doing something they shouldn't have been doing, but two, I think it's about the guy who is calling them out. You just cannot argue with Nehemiah. I ask again, how much clout does Nehemiah have right now? So my answer is 10. If your answer is anything other than that, I think you're woefully wrong. And again, we're in a deep, bitter blood feud. Now, look, it's very nice that these people said that. That's cool. But if you've ever called into a corporate call center or received customer service where it involves you getting a refund or the company doing right by you, as we've discussed in the past, you know you better dang well get that in writing. You better lock that in, because people can get real shifty and slimy and smarmy with their words. And you know who really has a tendency to do that is the fancy people who are in charge. And these people were willing to be slimy and smarmy in the first place. What's to stop them from being slimy and smarmy again? The second Nehemiah is off defending the walls against barbarian hordes with spears and stuff. These people could just turn around and be like, yeah, we said that, but seriously, I'm going to need you to pay that interest right now, and cause a huge problem. So Nehemiah is going to use pressure and oaths and the risk of shame and ostracization for these people to put it on record in front of everybody that they are making this vow. We're going to cement this thing. You guys have done wrong. You've answered me correctly, and we're not going to wait until tomorrow. We're going to solidify this thing right now. Nehemiah 5, where are we at? Keeping going in verse 12. Then I, Nehemiah, summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. What a funny thing. He doesn't trust them. He thinks it's nice that they said it, but he doesn't believe that for a minute. The same dishonesty that caused them to do the skeezy things in the first place could cause them to just disregard the words that they said to Nehemiah. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way may God shake out of his house and possessions every man who does not keep this promise. So may such a man be shaken out and emptied. Dang. A lot of these covenants and oaths in the Old Testament, there's a visualization that goes along with it. Maybe you've heard about the style of oath making in the Old Testament where you sacrifice some animals or you gut them and you separate them in half, and then the people entering into the covenant got to walk through an aisle made of gutted animals. I know it's gross, different times. They would walk through that, and what you were saying with this oath when you made that kind of a covenant was, may what happened to these animals happen to me if I violate this thing. There's drama to the oath making and the oath keeping and the covenant building. There's visualizations that go with it throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, as we're going to talk about in just a minute here. And so Nehemiah is putting this on him in front of everybody. He's got his big, heavy garment. There are no doubt a whole bunch of people around. I mean, the priests are around. That makes this thing absolutely binding and official. And he's whipping that heavy, heavy cloak. I don't picture that being like a little light, breezy oceanfront curtain where you don't really hear it. It more like ripples in the wind. I picture this thing being a big, hefty wool cloak that has some great snap to it, like a towel in the locker room. And when he snaps that thing out, he's like, may this happen to you if you violate this oath. And my brain, when I hear that, it goes right to Matthew 10. If you were here for the Matthew series, you remember that? This is the second of the 5 great speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured. This one is called the missional discourse in Matthew 10. Jesus has got all of his disciples rounded up. They're not that good at anything yet, but he sends them out with the same message that John the Baptist was saying, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The same message that Jesus really had been saying, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then Jesus gives a bunch of details about what the kingdom looks like. Well, now he's sending out these green disciples in Matthew 10. He's like, that's what you get. Also, there'll probably be some miracles and stuff. Go get them. Just tell people that. But do you remember what he says to do if they go to a village and they tell people about the message of Jesus and the kingdom, and the people in that village are like, yeah, I don't know, I'm not really into it. It's not really my thing. He tells them to do something performative like what Nehemiah is doing right here. Turning the page, Matthew 10, 14, starting in 11. Whatever town or village you enter, search for some worthy person there and stay at his house until you leave. This is Jesus talking to the disciples on their first evangelistic road trip here. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it's not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that home or town. How about that? They're still doing these performative gestures of being shaken out, symbolic of being rejected here 450, 500-ish years later in the time of Jesus. The point is this. Everybody knew at the time of Jesus what that gesture of pounding the dust off your sandals meant, and everybody knew what this gesture meant when Nehemiah did it. And then he goes on to even more thoroughly spell it out and be like, no, like I'm talking, may God reject you if you don't get this right. So I ask for a third time in this conversation, how much clout does Nehemiah have right now to take swings that big, to make those kind of proclamations? Nobody else here is as aware of the moment and what's going on. Nobody else here has the clarity of conviction that Nehemiah does. But this dude, he is the sheriff, and he can come into town and he can clean things up. And there is nobody, no amount of money, no amount of prestige that can match up to the moral and ethical purity and clarity of what he is doing, the singleness of mind, heart, and task that he brings to the table. Everything else pales in comparison. And as a result, how much clout does Nehemiah have? I might even crank that up to 11. Very impressive. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.